Welcome to Bayou Time. I'm Jacob DeGate. Glad to be your host. It's that time of year for elections, and on the set we now have State Representative Jerome Zeringue, who's going to try to help us navigate some of the things that are on the ballot this year. Good to see you, Jerome.
Jacob, thanks for having me.
All right. Of course, we have constitutional amendments. That's one thing that no matter whenever you have election, you're usually going to have some constitutional amendments on the ballot. I know some people have a problem with the number of constitutional amendments, but some of there are there for good reasons and whatnot. But we have 8 on the ballots.
Yeah.
What can you say about them?
Well, the thing is it's interesting that the U.S. Constitution has only been amended 27 times. The Louisiana Constitution has been amended over 250, and it looks like they're trying to do with it. There's going to be 11 constitutional amendments this fall, 8 of which will be on the November ballot, and there's 3 more on the December ballot. So yes, it seems like there's always an opportunity to throw another one on there.
All right, we'll start it off. We can go with amendment number 1 if you're ready. I think we have a slide we can
Sure.
pull up on it.
Yeah, and amendment number 1 is actually mine. It's one of the
Oh,
ones I
really?
introduced. Yeah, it was with the treasurer, and essentially what it does is, so we have several funds in Louisiana that are used to permanent funds for trust funds that fund various things. The most within this amendment, the ones that have the greatest amount in terms of potential and benefit from this are the Louisiana Education Quality Trust Fund, the Millennial Trust Fund, Rockefeller Wildlife Refuge Funds. And the thing is when these funds were created, there's over 3.4 billion in those funds, but when they were created, there was a limitation of which they could only use 35% to invest in equities. But what this amendment does is essentially lets these funds, invest up to 65, the treasurer to invest up to 65% in equities, which is similar to the Teachers Retirement Fund. All the other funds in Louisiana allow that up to that 65%. Doesn't mean that they have to, it just gives them the flexibility. And this will provide a lot of money for educational purposes that the trust fund is used for. Also, they have the Quality Education Fund, but there's also the health fund that they have that will provide additional money for health care. And this just allows them to take advantage of the market when the market's good. And it's just kicking up that exemption from 35% to 65% for the treasurer to be able to invest those funds.
Okay, and the money that's sitting in right now, is it just in a bank earning a nominal interest, or how is it right now?
Well, it's in some of it is in very conservative investments simply because, again, they can only invest 35% in equities. This would allow them to invest in broad spectrum but risk-free. Everyone, thinks and assumes that, well, they're going to invest in the stock market. Stock market's so volatile and you may lose the money. But it allows them to invest up to 65%, but the treasurer and the others have been doing this a long time, and they have people who they live and breathe this stuff, and they're going to invest it to maximize the return, but they're not going to put it at risk. So it just gives them the flexibility to invest more of those dollars in equities, where right now they're only limited to 35. And again, many of the other funds throughout Louisiana that were created allow that 65% threshold, of which these several funds don't have that ability right now.
Okay. All right, well, let's move on to the next one. We have amendment number 2, and that regards some property tax exemptions with people that are veterans with disabilities. It seems like this one or one like it has come up numerous times. I remember
there's several, and God bless them, our first responders, military. There seems to be at least every session or two a exemption that, and again, I think everyone supports our military and everyone else, but there are a slew of exemptions that actually impact local governments, because these are going to be on property taxes, which directly affect local governments. So people have to consider if, in fact, or how they're going to vote on this based upon, again, everybody supports the military, but the potential impacts to local governments. And so it's property tax changes under the proposed amendment. It's various degrees based upon the disability of the military disability and their ranking and how it is. So if they're 100% disabled, they would have to pay no parish taxes. Right now, the limit is up to 150,000. Everyone has a 75,000 homestead exemption. Right now, it's up to 150,000. This is going to remove that exemption and put it up to, they won't pay any, if they're 100% disabled, they won't pay any parish taxes. If they're 70 to 99% disabled, if their classification is 70 to 99%, their disability rating, they'll get the 75 like everybody else, but they'll also get an additional 45,000, which would bring it up to 120,000. And if they're 50 to 69%, again, the 75% we'd all get, but they get an additional 25,000. So it would be up to 100,000 if their disability ranking was from 50 to 60%. So I know these amendments kind of confusing after a while, and there's different layers within them. But this is based upon the rating and the percentage of that rating, allowing for disabled veterans to receive some exemptions on their property taxes.
All right. And right now, though, they do have some exemptions, all right, but this is just simply an expansion of that.
Right. So most disabled, based upon their rating, if their rating is 100% right now, they have an exemption of up to 150,000.
Now up to the third one. This one is regarding classified civil service employees and their ability to support people, their family members in public elections.
So this is a longstanding exemption, ethics exemption that was generated in the early 40s within the Constitution, but essentially it puts a restriction on those classified employees. Immediate family members can't participate in certain circumstances within elections if their family member is running from and exempts them from, or it doesn't exempt them, it precludes them from engaging or participating in election activities. This is going to remove that exemption, and quite frankly, there are 51,000 civil service employees. The exemption was put in place for a particular reason, and I guess it's just some people who were relatives of folks running for office felt that they were prevented from participating in the election process, which, again, voting has nothing to do with that. This is just allowing them to do commercials, to go to events, to put posters in their yards or signs, or go out and promote their family member, and this would remove that exemption.
All right, now moving on to amendment number 4. This one is dealing with local governments and their ability to waive water charges that are a result of damage to the water system not caused by a customer. Okay, and can you tell us, I guess, the reasoning behind this one? I'm sure it deals with a little bit of on the constitutional prohibition of the donation of public funds and whether or not the water service companies have that ability to waive some of these charges.
Right, and essentially that's, for the most part, the problem is that the state cannot give away anything of value. And the problem is there were several instances where people were, their water line was broken, or there was some impact on their water system from the main to their house. So right now, as it is, from the main to the street, it's the water, the provider of the water is responsibility. But from the meter to the house, it's the homeowner's responsibility. Again, some question, well, is it the responsibility of other people to pay for maybe something that might have happened? We all understand that we've experienced before. You might have a water pipe break, or if there's a freeze, your pipe breaks. Is it the water system or the other people who participate's responsibility to pay for the fact that you didn't either wrap your pipes? But the reality is that the water systems themselves can negotiate right now. This is just going to waive that ability in terms of being able to not impose that charge on those or increase the rates on those homeowners.
I see. Okay, moving on, we next amendment. This one deals about the ability to allow the levying of lower millage rate by local taxing authorities while maintaining the authority's ability to adjust the current authorized millage rate. So this one's a little bit more complicated. This one is. Public probably does need it explained a little bit.
It is, and it's somewhat confusing, and it is, and it could have significant impacts on local entities. For instance, levy districts and others and other entities that rely on these millages. But what happens right now, if there's a millage that's being imposed, the Constitution requires that if the assessed values go up, that if they're going to, you can reduce the millage to maintain the amount that's being collected. But if for some reasons there might be an emergency, there might be additional, for instance, in the levy district, might be additional projects that they need additional dollars, they can keep the millage and receive the additional revenue, but to continue to do that, every 4 years, they're required to go back and put that on the rolls. This would remove that requirement that they have to, within the 4-year period, come back and put it to the people, because if they don't, then it would just, it would get to the level that it was, and I know it sounds confusing, but it would get to the level that achieved that revenue that was being acquired through that millage. For instance, if there's a 2.5 assessment on property and property values go up, well, to keep the 2.5, to get the same amount that the 2.5 was generating, you don't have to increase that. But the assessments go up to where it can now be 3.0. But to maintain that same level, you can go back to the 2.5. So right now, if they go up to the higher level, they're required within that 4-year period to put it back on the roll and not necessarily have to keep collecting if they want to have that ability to do that. This just removes that requirement, and it's actually a good thing to help local governments who are in need, just removing that requirement to have to come back within a 4-year period to put it back on the rolls.
I see. Okay. Now, going on to amendment number 6, we have about a minute left. Can you explain this one a little bit?
Yeah, so this is primarily for New Orleans, and it limits increased property assessments in New Orleans, and granted property values, they're going up. It's hard for people in fixed incomes to have to pay that increase. It doesn't affect people who rent. They're still going to have their rent's going to go up if the property value increases, so it doesn't really impact them. But homeowners and others, if their assessments go up, so will their taxes. So this is going to limit, in some cases, to no more than 10%, particularly here in New Orleans. It's only specific to New Orleans, but the concern is if they pass it over there, then it's going to trickle down to other entities as well. So it's just if people are interested in addressing that 10%, eliminating that 10% increase, and that's specific to just Orleans.
This one is one that I think it picked up nationally in whether or not this one deals with involuntary servitude. This one, I guess some people are saying it's a vote to whether or not to ban slavery. Can you explain a little bit about that?
Sure, and this speaks to kind of what the nuance of how you write these things make a difference, and it can affect how people both perceive it and what ultimately is incorporated into the amendment, which could have an impact on how people vote for it. The author of the amendment in the bill is opposing it because of the confusing language, which is an interesting thing. So what they were trying to do is just take out within the Constitution references to slavery. Other states have done this, but they were a little bit more clear in terms of how it was addressed. But the way it's written now, and confusing involuntary servitude and slavery within the same statute that refers to the ability for trustees or others to do work. And that's what makes it a little bit confusing, because in the current Constitution, it says that slavery and involuntary servitude are prohibited, except in the latter case as a punishment for crime. And you compare that with the wording of the amendment, which says slavery and involuntary servitude are prohibited, but this does not apply to the otherwise lawful administration of criminal justice. And what they were trying to achieve is to make sure that work duty or people, prisoners, you'd still be able to use that. But it kind of boogers up the language and makes it more confusing than what it has to be. And they could have done other things, like the Tennessee had one similar to this, and their amendment basically said slavery and involuntary servitude are forever prohibited. Nothing in this section shall prohibit an inmate from working when the inmate has been duly convicted of a crime, which is clear. That's basically what the Louisiana amendment was trying to do, but they don't say it as clearly as the Tennessee amendment. So it's confusing, and I think the challenge or the problem is some people interpret the way the amendment is, even if it passed, it doesn't remove the reference to slavery, and it still allows for that condition. And so it's confusing. It was written weird, and I don't know. I don't think, even when the author comes out against it, it has some issues.
Yeah, and it seems like if you do see it fail, then I'm sure the national media is going to try to spin it to saying that the Louisiana people are somehow being racist and not wanting to outlaw slavery.
Right. Well, that's what's so crazy about it, because if it passes, some will say, well, Louisiana people wanted to continue to allow for slavery. But like you said, if they don't pass it, then, it can be interpreted either way. And that's why it's just, frankly, it shouldn't have been on the ballot, but it is. And so we'll deal with it.
Okay. Next one goes to another, let's see, this one is another assessment property tax issue, if you want to explain this one.
Sure. This is just, again, another exemption or special assessment to allow for groups or folks who have a disability, to allow for an exemption within taxes as well. So in Louisiana, we currently have a special assessment for 4 groups of property owners in specialized circumstances that will allow them to freeze the assessed value of their property to protect them from future tax increases. And that includes property owners who are either permanently or totally disabled. But it applies only to homeowners whose adjusted gross household income is $100,000 or less, and it requires them to certify with the assessor each year that they meet that income criteria. So what this would do, it would remove that requirement that they have to go annually to certify that. The challenge with this is that, or those who are concerned about it, there's no correlation with a disability and income. Essentially it's saying, well, you're disabled, so I'm going to make less, so I should be given this exemption. They don't necessarily correlate. There's no doubt that people would like, and the original intent is to help those folks with disabilities, especially on lower incomes of less than $100,000. And that's why the certification is in place. This removes that annual certification, and if there's a temporary disability, what happens if, there's some cases where maybe they continue to receive it. So there's, I understand, a lot of people understand the need and the intent of what they're trying to achieve, but fulfilling that benefit still could call into question some initial problems, again, either with income or the ability to continue doing it. So it's basically, that's what it does. It removes the requirement that someone with a disability would have to go every year to certify that their income is below $100,000 and they're still disabled.
Okay, so that's your 8 amendments that are being proposed for this November election. Looks like we're not gonna have enough time to go through the next 3, but we will bring somebody back. Hopefully, maybe you can come back to when it gets a little closer to the December election, and we can talk to those 3 that are on the ballot. But of course, we went through these 8. I know some people out there they just simply check no every time a constitutional amendment comes up. But as you said, sometimes there are some good ones out there that need to be looked at a little bit more closely.
Yeah, the reality is, again, there are some really good ones on here. One for the allow for the investment, others to allow for entities for tax purposes are good. So I encourage everyone to go out and read them and vote your conscience, but there are some amendments to consider.
All right. Well, thank you very much for joining us. We certainly appreciate it.
Thank you, Jake. Thanks for having me.
All right. Stay tuned for more right here on HTV.